Jackson McAllister always hated the desert wind. Deployed for the third time in 2 years, he had grown used to the desert's scorching heat, and the way fine grains of sand found every seam of his gear, but the wind, dry and ceaseless, still felt like some cosmic irritant against his skin. This evening, he walked from the communications tent toward the small makeshift cafe the base had thrown together. As he stepped inside, the overhead light glared off the metal tables, reminding him of how far he was from the comfortable living room in which he'd once reclined on his favorite couch back home. "Yeah," he murmured under his breath, "I'll be glad when this is over." He was about to order a coffee when his phone buzzed. The number flashed local with the same area code as his hometown. His heart gave a slight jolt. He had 2 kids, a wife, and a quiet suburban street that usually didn't make trouble. He answered quickly. "Hello," he said, tense creeping into his voice. Jackson came a low murmur. "It's Elijah from next door." Jackson swallowed. Why would Elijah be calling? "Hey man, everything okay?" Jackson asked. "I've still got 4 weeks left here. That's what I wanted to talk to you about," Elijah said, sounding uncomfortable. "Look, Jackson, I wouldn't do this unless I thought you really needed to know, but your wife Tamara, she's having people over." Jackson pulled the phone tighter against his ear as he stepped back outside the makeshift Sea Cafe. The evening sun in the Middle Eastern sky glowed red, but all he saw was the swirling chaos of that single statement. "Sheck having people over," Elijah Jackson said slowly. "You can't just call me with half a story. I'm thousands of miles from home. If something's wrong, tell me." "There are men," Elijah said in a resigned voice. "It's not just one. Different men, different cars. They show up at all hours, but especially late, and they're inside your house for quite a while." Jackson's heart hammered. He tried to keep his breathing measured, tried to focus on the details. "You're sure these aren't just friends, colleagues? Maybe it's her cousin, or something else." "I'm sure," Elijah replied. "A few times I caught glimpses through the window. I saw them on the couch. It didn't look like any casual get-together. I've got license plates, pictures." "I'm sorry, Jackson, you're too good a guy for me to just keep quiet." A long moment passed where Jackson's pulse roared in his ears. Then he said in a stony hush, "Send me everything." He spent the night poring over the photos Elijah emailed. He recognized the front of his house, the driveway, the porch, the big silver mailbox, and there were men, some older, some younger, cars parked at suspicious times. Timestamp after timestamp. Several glimpses showed Tamara at the doorway, letting them in with a bright smile. A few shots taken through parted blinds showed her leaning across a stranger on the couch, or his arm around her waist, an unspoken closeness that turned Jackson's stomach. The next morning, the scorching desert wind felt sharper, and the air seemed harder to breathe. It took him 2 days to get emergency leave. He said it was a family crisis. He wasn't lying. The commanding officer gave him a stiff handshake and told him to handle business back home. Jackson packed his duffel with single-minded focus, ignoring his bunkmates' questions about whether he was all right. He just needed to get on that plane. On the flight back, he stared at the overhead lights and tried to piece it together logically. Tamara, mother of his 2 daughters, a woman he'd known for 8 years. She had to be lonely, sure, with him gone so much, but multiple men over and over. Why, he whispered to himself, it felt impossible, yet he had the evidence on his phone. By the time he landed stateside, his head was full of swirling anger and heartbreak, and that raw edge of betrayal that made him want to break something. He couldn't just storm home and confront her. If Tamara was brazen enough to do this under her own roof, she might lie her way out of it. If he didn't present airtight proof, no, he told himself he would handle this carefully, logically. That was how to approach any mission. Gather intelligence, plan, then strike. He pulled his rental car into a modest motel parking lot about 15 minutes from his quiet neighborhood, and used a credit card. She didn't know about the room. Smelled of stale coffee and cheap air freshener. The floral bedspread had seen better days. Jackson sat on the edge of that bed, phone in hand, going through Elijah's evidence. Once more he pressed the screen to call Elijah. The phone Rang, and then a voice. Jackson. Elijah said softly. Thanks for everything. Jackson answered, I'm here in town. I'm not going to my house yet. Let me know if you need anything. Elijah said, relief flooding his tone. It's been bugging me for months. A chill ran through Jackson's spine. Months, he echoed. This has been going on for months. I only really noticed it consistently the last 2 months. Elijah clarify, but I suspect longer. Look, I know it hurts. If you want me to watch the house tonight, I will. I can send you a text if anyone comes by. Jackson's jaw flexed. Appreciate it. Gathering evidence that night, Jackson parked 2 streets away from his own driveway, switching off the engine. The clock read 10:13 p.m. He settled low in the driver's seat, phone balanced on his thigh, eyes trained on the road leading up to his house. He waited, adrenaline thrumming as minutes BL into hours. At 11:46 a.m., white truck slowed in front of his place. A tall, thick-set man hopped out, pressed something on his phone, and Tamara opened the front door. Jackson tensed. His phone's camera captured the entire thing through the gloom. Though he zoomed as best he could, he'd never seen the man. Stocky build, broad shoulders, a baseball cap. Tamara leaned in for a hug that looked very comfortable. Too comfortable, Jackson thought bitterly. He watched them vanish inside the house. Lights glowed behind drawn curtains. He rubbed his stubbled chin, forcing himself to remain calm. The first step was to gather as much visual proof as possible, not to burst in and ruin everything with rage. An hour later, the front door opened again. The man emerged, adjusting his shirt. He looked around the dark street, as if checking for watchers, never suspecting Jackson's hidden vantage. Then he hopped into his truck and drove away. Jackson exhaled, then pressed his phone's record button to stop. Another piece of evidence, along with Elijah's earlier footage and the screenshots of men's license plates. The fury brewing inside him felt like a physical weight in his gut. The second night Jackson returned, this time no visitors. On the third, around midnight, a young man showed up in a beat-up hatchback. He stayed for a good 2 hours. The pattern was consistent. Men appeared as though invited by a simple text, came in discreetly, left in the small hours of the night. Jackson decided he had enough visual proof. He wanted audio, something to confirm that Tamara was sleeping with them. He turned to an old friend from his military tech department, a hobbyist who toyed with small listening devices. I can get you a bug you can hide in your own living room, the friend told him over the phone. You sure about this? Because if she catches it, that's a massive breach of trust. Jackson's voice was hollow. Trust is already gone. He arranged for a discreet drop-off, and soon had a tiny microphone no bigger than his pinky fingertip. Later, in the dead of night, he snuck around the back, found the key stashed under a flower pot, and let himself inside. With measured footsteps, it felt surreal to tiptoe through his own living room, as though he were an intruder. The place smelled the same cinnamon air freshener, with a faint hint of Tamara's perfume. His children's toys were stacked in the corner. A heartbreaking wave of longing for normally nearly brought him to his knees. He planted the bug behind the TV console, hidden among cables. Before leaving, he slid open a closet door and looked at Tamara's coat, the one he bought her for Christmas 2 years ago. Then he noticed a large men's jacket that definitely wasn't his size. He swallowed a tremor of fury, forced himself back into stealth mode, and left. He spent the next morning at a diner, phone in hand, listening live to the bug's audio feed for hours. The house was silent. Then around noon, he heard Tamara's voice. Oh, come on in, she said brightly. You want something to drink? A man's muffled voice responded, something about being fine with water. Jackson's heart pounded. He turned the volume up, ignoring the half-eaten scrambled eggs on his plate. They made small talk about her week, then the conversation turned flirtatious. The microphone, though tiny, picked up enough. You're looking incredible, the man said. You sure your husband's away? Tamara let out a short laugh. Believe me, he's not coming back anytime soon. Not that he'd care if he did. Always gone, always busy, and I get lonely, you know. Jackson's grip on his phone tightened until the corners dug into his palm. He felt each word like a scalpel scraping away any lingering illusions. A few minutes later, the sound of kissing, shuffling, Tamara's giggle, the man's breathing intensifying. Jackson forced himself to keep listening, jaw clenched. Then footsteps, likely toward the couch, soft moans he recognized all too vividly. He pressed stop on the recording app, his stomach twisted, and knots. He'd heard enough. It was more proof than any court would need. 2 days later, Jackson walked into the last front office of Harding and Lowe attorneys, a young receptionist, recognized his name and escorted him to an office lined with thick legal tours. A bespectacled lawyer named Simone Harding rose to greet him. "Captain McAllister," she said, shaking his hand, "please have a seat. I'm told this is a delicate family matter." Jackson swallowed. "That's one way to put it." He opened the folder in his lap, pulling out printouts of screenshots, license plates, pictures of Tamara hugging other men, timestamps. He had an external drive with audio files too. Simone's brows rose as she flipped through them. "It's quite a bit of evidence," she commented gently. "I want to file for divorce with minimal financial damage," Jackson said curtly. "I also want custody of my daughters. I can't just let them stay with a mother who thinks it's okay to bring random men home. She's reckless or worse." Simone took a slow breath. "You have a strong case. In many states adultery can be a factor in divorce settlements, particularly in awarding or denying alimony. If you have proof, I have it." He interrupted. "Recordings, photos." She glanced at him. "All right, but let me warn you, don't confront her physically. Don't do anything rash that might undermine your position. Keep your cool. Gather more evidence if necessary, and we'll proceed. I'll draw the papers when you serve her. It's going to be explosive, especially if she doesn't see it coming." Jackson closed his eyes briefly. The image of Tamar's betrayal was burned in his mind. "She won't see it coming," he said quietly. "Then we'll be prepared." Simone said, "I also recommend you start protecting your bank accounts. Sometimes when an unfaithful spouse realizes the jig is up, they try to drain accounts or hide assets." Jackson gave a nod, already feeling that iron resolve come over him. "Understood." Preparing for the showdown over the next week, he kept up his quiet surveillance from the motel. He recorded each new man's arrival and departure, accumulating an unassailable wall of proof. He also visited the bank, separating most of his money into a new account under just his name. He froze shared credit cards, ensuring Tamara couldn't run up a secret bill. Late one evening, Elijah texted him, "Hey man, that big black SUV is back again." Jackson's entire body clenched. The black SUV had shown up a few times with tinted windows. Its driver was a slick-looking guy in designer clothes. Jackson had particularly disliked him for reasons he couldn't name. Maybe that his arog seemed to match Tamara's easy flirtation. With a bitter twist of his mouth, Jackson drove over, parked in his usual hidden spot, and started filming. Sure enough, the black SUV was in the driveway, lights on. In the living room, he glimpsed the silhouette of the man with Tamara, arms around her waist. In that moment, Jackson realized he no longer felt heartbreak, only a burning need to finalize this. She had turned their home into some casual flophouse for men, and she was doing it while he was out risking his life for the family. Enough was enough. After the man left, Jackson made calls to finalize everything. He arranged an official date to serve the divorce papers, had them in his glove box, ready to be delivered, and started planning exactly how to confront Tamara. Part of him, though, wanted a measure of not just justice, but an unfiltered vengeance. He daydreamed about a scenario that put her lover on his knees, made him face the consequences, but the lawyer's cautionary words echoed in the back of his mind, "Don't do anything rash yet." That night, the anger wouldn't let him sleep. The next morning, a Saturday, Jackson finally decided to go home, and broad daylight, he unlocked the front door, letting the soft smell of home wash over him. It felt both familiar and alien. The living room was tidy, perhaps unnaturally so, like Tamara had tried to wipe away any evidence from the previous night. He found her in the kitchen, hair tied back, making pancakes. For a surreal moment, he recalled the sweet weekends they used to share when he'd be home from deployment, eager to see her and the girls. She whirled around at the sound of the door, her eyes widened, spatula frozen in her hand. "Jackson," she said in disbelief, "you're back. I thought you weren't home for another 3 weeks." He dropped his duffel bag by the entry. "Plans changed." She set the spatula down, face flickering with a complicated blend of guilt and confusion. "You look exhausted. When did you?" How he steeled himself against the wave of emotions. "Got back a week ago, actually," he said. "I was staying at a motel." Her brows furrowed. "A motel? Why?" On earth he stared at her until she began to fidget, as if sensing some deep threat. Because I've been watching, he said softly. Watching what? She asked, voice warbling. Everything. He placed his phone on the counter. A still image showed the front door camera. Elijah had captured her eyes, flicked to it, and she said, You've been spying on me, she whispered, cheeks going ashen. He reached inside his jacket, pulled out the stack of photos. Tell me I'm wrong, he said, tossing them across the counter. There were photos of different men stepping onto the porch. One shot showing her hugging that stocky stranger near the living room window. Tamara's mouth hung open, face twisted in panic. That's not. How could you, Jackson? Let me explain, she gasped. Explain how you've turned our house into some random hooking spot, he snapped. Explain how you couldn't wait for me to come home, or even talk to me about being lonely or frustrated, so you decided to bring all these men in. Tamara's eyes filled with tears. It's not that simple. You're never around. I've been alone for so long, and we barely talk anymore. You come home for a few weeks, and then you're gone again. You act like the kids and I are some side gig in your life. Jackson's anger spiked. I do that to keep a roof over our heads, to pay for everything you the girls need. You think I want to be deployed all the time, that I enjoy risking my life in a desert? I do it because it's my job, and it keeps us secure. She folded her arms defensively. Well, I needed actual companionship, Jackson. He bit back a surge of raw fury. So you found it with multiple men, he said, voice shaking. You had them in my bed, on my couch for months. How many, Tamar? She glared at him through tears. What difference does it make? You've clearly decided I'm some monster. You want a confession? Fine, it was more than one. Yes, I thought it was harmless. Then it kept going. I got in over my head, but your constant absence, it's your fault too. He let out a harsh laugh. I was absent because of my duty, not because I wanted to run around with strangers. Her face crumpled. I never planned for it to be so many, she said quietly, but I was resentful and lonely. One affair turned into two, and I guess I just stopped caring. Jackson's rage turned cold. Well, I care, and now you'll face the consequences. He pulled the divorce papers from his bag and dropped them on the counter. Sign these when you're ready, he said. I want the house. I want custody of the kids. I'm not giving you a penny more than you deserve, and from where I stand you deserve nothing. She stared at the official documents as though they were a live grenade. You can't just steal my kids away, she cried. He shook his head. I'm not stealing them, I'm protecting them. If you bring random men in while they're upstairs, that's irresponsible, and I can prove it in court. Tamara burst into tears, sinking against the counter. Jackson, please, we can talk about this. You don't have to blow everything up. He swallowed. A part of him recognized the heartbreak in her, that she might be genuinely remorseful in this moment, but the avalanche was already rolling. I tried to talk with you for years, he said. You made your choices. He left her crying in the kitchen, stepping out to the porch to breathe in the fresh midday air. The weight on his chest was suffocating. In the days that followed, the tension in the house was unbearable. They had two daughters, Vanessa 9 and Tori 6, who were staying with Tamara's mother for a short while so the parents could sort things out. That left Jackson and Tamara alone under the same roof. She tried to talk to him, repeatedly tried to reason with him, but he retreated to the guest bedroom, ignoring her attempts. He was too angry, too hurt. Then one afternoon, a day before Tamara's mother was supposed to bring the girls home, Jackson noticed a strange car rolling up out front. Peering through the living room curtains, he recognized that black SUV. A tall man stepped out, looking determined. Tamara rushed out the door to meet him on the porch. Jackson pressed his ear to the window, hearing raised voices. What are you doing here? Tamara hissed. We need to talk, the man said. You told me your husband was overseas for weeks now. I hear he's back, messing up everything. And what about you and me? She let out a harsh whisper. There is no you and me. Everything's falling apart now thanks to how sloppy you were the other night. You took calls in my kitchen like you owned the place. The man scoffed. Oh, so it's my fault. Maybe if you told me the truth about him coming back, I wouldn't have walked into a trap. Where is he anyway? Jackson felt his temper flare. He's talking about me like I'm some inconvenience. He slipped out the side door, circling around to The front porch. They were so engrossed in arguing they didn't see him until he was halfway up the path looking for me. Jackson called, voice echoing across the small lawn. The man whirled, blinking in surprise. Tamara, eyes huge, took a step back. Jackson's gut coiled as he recognized the man's confident sneer. This was someone who clearly had no shame in stepping into another man's marriage. You must be Jackson, the man said coolly. You got a name, Jackson? Asked, fists curling at his sides. Call me Carlos, the man replied. Look, I didn't come here to fight. Oh, Jackson shot back. You came here to see my wife again. Carlos set his jaw. I just need clarity. Tamara, you said you'd handle this. Now he's messing with everything. Tamara let out an anguished groan. Carlos, please leave. This is not the time or place. But Jackson had heard enough. Some in him snapped. You want clarity? I'll give you clarity, he growled. You invaded my home, took advantage of a lonely woman, and now you're acting like you're the victim. Get off my property. Carlos's eyes flickered. She invited me, man. It's not my fault your marriage was on the rocks. Tamara reached for Jackson's arm. Please don't do anything crazy. Jackson turned to her, voice shaking with rage. Crazy? How about letting this jerk swagger through my house while I'm risking my life overseas? That's crazy. He shoved Carlos' heart in the chest. The man stumbled back off the porch steps, nearly losing his balance. Get out of here before I really lose my temper, Jackson warned. Carlos's face twisted in anger, but he saw the fury in Jackson's eyes. You're not worth it, he muttered, rubbing his chest where Jackson's palm had struck him. Tamara, you've got my number. If you ever want to talk, she glared. Just go. He climbed into his SUV, slamming the door, and reverber out in a squeal of tires. Tamara burst into tears, covering her face. Why can't you just let me handle things quietly? She sobbed. I never asked him to come back here. Jackson gave a bitter laugh. You should have thought about that before inviting him in the first place. She dropped onto the porch bench, tears streaming. I messed up. I'm sorry. All right, I never wanted it to go this far. He stepped away, voice husky with betrayal. Well, it did. That evening Jackson sat in the dark living room staring at the array of evidence he'd compiled, photos, recordings, the divorce papers, yet unsigned. The ache in his chest told him he wasn't satisfied with just a legal outcome. The sense of betrayal demanded more. He opened a drawer in the side table. Inside was a small black lockbox containing his personal sidearm, a .357 revolver. He never used it stateside except for practice at the range. He lifted it, feeling the weight in his palm. This is dangerous, he whispered, but maybe it's exactly what they deserve. His mind flitted to the image of Carlos sneering in his face, or those other men casually walking in, as though it were their house. The fury welled up anew. The lawyer's warning chimed in his mind. Don't do anything that might cost you custody. He closed his eyes. Maybe he could orchestrate a confrontation that exposed the truth once and for all. Something no judge could ignore. A sting. Perhaps he knew enough about infiltration and subterfuge from the army. If Tamara insisted on continuing these affairs, or if any of these men came back, he'd catch them in the act, this time face to face with a camera rolling. He pictured pinning them to the ground on the front porch, forcing them to confess the affair with Tamara in front of the world, or at least in front of someone who mattered. The voice in his head asked, is that what you want, to humiliate them? He stared at the gun. Maybe so. He was done being the naive, blindsided husband. A week later, Tamara had effectively moved to her mother's with the kids. They rarely spoke, except for short, tense updates about custody discussions. The house was mostly empty. Jackson, still living there, found it easier on his raw nerves not to see her daily part of him. Felt relief. He didn't want to watch her mope or plead forgiveness. Late one afternoon, while clearing old files from the home office, he discovered a note scrawled in Tamara's hand.